This is What's at Stake, Election 2024. And I'm super excited to be able to talk to you all today about the importance of this upcoming election. Now, you've been hearing from campaign ads, commercials, websites, social media about how serious this upcoming election is. Now, I'm not trying to scare you, but this might arguably be the most consequential election in modern history. There's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of matters that are going to finally be addressed at the ballot box on November 5th. Yes, Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, will be the general election in America. People from all over the country, from various backgrounds and generations, will be casting their vote for the next president of the United States. And interesting enough, these presidential candidates are different. Very different. I mean, they are night and day, literally. They're different in gender, racial identity, age, and even positions on issues that impact all Americans. Now, right here in Philadelphia, we're looked at as a major city of interest. Both of the presidential candidates have come to this city multiple times. They have made it a point to really check in and reach out to voters in the ways they think are necessary. They've debated about crowd size. They've had conversations about, issues that some have viewed to be a little too controversial, some issues that people feel are just flat out lies, and other matters that really shape what's at the core of our democracy. This is a democracy. Civic participation is important. Whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, a Libertarian, a member of the Working Families Party, a third-party candidate that is, for the Green Party, it doesn't matter. What matters most is that on November 5th, you cast your vote to elect the next president. Also, there's going to be several other races that also are going to be a big deal. There is an important contested U.S. Senate race that is also epic. There are also congressional races across Pennsylvania that for some of you Philadelphians who pretty much we will have the same incumbents because this is a majority Democratic city. There are other congressional races across Pennsylvania where you might have family members that might actually have to wake up and give a little bit more concern about the outcome of their respective district. There are also several state house races that are also up for grabs. Several state house races that is not only in Philadelphia, but also in the nearby collar counties and suburbs. So it's important to know who your state representative is and your state senator is as well. And there are also some big key state races. We're talking Auditor General, which this is a contested race between two black men for the first time in Pennsylvania history. We're seeing two black men from both political aisles, Malcolm Kenyatta, who's a Democrat, going against someone who is the current incumbent, who became the first black man to ever be elected statewide in Pennsylvania history. And so that incumbent is a Republican, and he's a black man. This is historic because potentially if Malcolm Kenyatta wins the Auditor General seat, he will become the first openly gay elected official to ever win a statewide seat in Pennsylvania history, and the third person of color, specifically the third black elected official to ever win, following Austin Davis and, of course, the current Auditor General. So these are some very big key races to follow. There's also the race for treasurer, which is up for grabs, and also attorney general. Because Governor Josh Shapiro vacated that seat when he became the governor, there was an interim attorney general. There was a vacant seat for that seat. So when attorney general became vacant with the interim did not run for re-election, nor did they seek the seat. So now it's an open seat between Eugene D. Pasquale as a Democrat versus his Republican opponents. And it is a very open race as well. So now that you know the lay of the land, let's get into the candidates that are shaping this race. Specifically, let's talk about the presidential race, because that seems to be the race where a lot of voters are still arguably undecided. I mean, that's a little subjective, but here we go. So, on the Democratic side is Vice President Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a Libra. She'll be 60 years old in October. She is a woman who is both black and of South Asian descent. Contrary to some of these fake news reports, Kamala identifies as a black woman and as a South Asian woman. She is of mixed ancestry. She is the vice president of the United States currently under President Joe Biden. As you all know, she took the seat, the opportunity to be in the presidential candidate seat shortly after President Biden had a very chaotic debate performance in June, which led to a lot of people, several of media outlets and elected officials asking for him to step out the race. He did with grace, and so that often led to the support for Vice President Harris to accept the Democratic nomination for president at the Democratic National Convention. As a result of that, she became the first woman of color to ever accept a major party nomination for president, which is historic because she's the first woman vice president, and she has the potential to become the first woman president, following the very close, but not there yet, race of Hillary Clinton in 2016, when Hillary Clinton became the first woman ever to accept a major party nomination for president in 2016, when she then would later lose to Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is perceived by many people to be liberal, but she does have some very strong moderate tendings. Whereas some people might look at Elizabeth Warren as being a little bit more progressive on issues around the economy and immigration and other matters, Kamala Harris's track record has been fairly moderate on those issues. But she also shows strong liberal traits when it comes to issues around reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and others. On law enforcement and criminal justice reform, she has nuanced views. In some regards, she is very big on strengthening law enforcement, but she has spoken up about reform to the way in which policing operates and also issues around mass incarceration. Her viewpoints have gotten many critics on the far left to feel as though she's not taking strong enough stances that are more progressive in her liking, but moderates oftentimes do favor Harris on seem to be a little bit more pragmatic while still being liberal. She is very much so, appears to be more liberal than even her right side President Biden on issues pertaining to economic support. She wants to increase opportunities for more homeowners. That's some of her biggest issues, is really giving more incentives to small business owners, homeowners, young families, those who make under $400,000 a year. She is trying to call for more tax reforms for those major, the 1%, arguably, to pay higher taxes. She is talking about expanding her agenda on various fronts, specifically around children and also Medicare. The Biden administration, including Harris, has definitely made it a point to emphasize how they cap down the cost of insulin. She has been very prominent on discussing her interest in having more reform across the board. And so that has been the agenda. And for those who have often argued, well, where is her platform? Her platform is on her campaign website. She lays out a very clear plan. And her vice president, presidential pick is Tim Walz, who is a former governor, who is someone who also kind of shares alongside some of those moderate ideals. Both Walz and Harris are gun owners, but they do believe in banning assault weapons. They do believe in having gun control reform, but they don't want to take people's guns away, and they've made that very clear in their platform. Tim Walz is also someone who is a supporter of reproductive rights. He has been very candid about his wife and going through the IVF process and how there should be more expansions to protect the reproductive rights of individuals. Walz has also been very vocal about basically the government not minding its business when it comes to women's rights and also other LGBTQ plus rights as well. So more people have seen Walz as being a strong progressive, but also a nice moderate balance to to Harris's agenda. Now, on the right side of this, on the right, no pun intended, President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, who is an incumbent, somebody who has been very staunch on his stances around very strong conservative views. He does not believe that the election in 2020 was a fair election, even though several courts have dismissed those claims. He has divorced himself for accountability around the January 6th insurrection. He has talked about a national ban on abortion, and his vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance, also has as well. Now, this brings us to our next portion, the issues, which is really important to understand what are the big issues that is shaping this current elections cycle. Reproductive rights is a major issue. Reproductive rights, since the erosion of Roe v. Wade from the Supreme Court during the Biden administration, the Roe v. Wade, the ending of Roe v. Wade, which gave women the right to choosing to have an abortion, to choosing what to do with their individual bodies, was stripped away. This is a fact. Roe v. Wade is done. It's been killed by the Supreme Court. And ever since then, there's been conversations in Congress to codify it, to restore it, to give women their right to choose. Now, conservatives have different views. There's been a lot of misinformation about the time in which people decide to terminate a pregnancy. There's been a lot of misinformation. To be very clear, there is no state that allows for anyone to abort a child right at the point of delivery. That is just not true. There has been some conservative talking heads and even the candidates, specifically Trump and Vance, that have put this misinformation out. It's just simply not true. There is no state in the United States that allows for such a termination to happen at that late stage of pregnancy. Also, what's very important to note is the issue around immigration. There has been a lot of misinformation around the border, a lot of xenophobic rhetoric around, peddling misinformation around the expansion of fentanyl. Now, according to the ACLU, it has been reported that issues around fentanyl and other types of opioid-related substances, that the border is not the major distributor that is leading to the smuggling of such substances. That is actually happening in the United States across the country. Now, we know that in Philadelphia, Kensington has been an issue around the opioid epidemic. But to be very clear, the border around the United States and Mexico is not smuggling massive amounts of fentanyl and opioid-related types of substances. That's just not true. But because of the heightened fear that has been oftentimes spoken by some of both candidates around the border, a lot of misinformation around what's actually happening at the border and the crisis that's taking place there has led to people assuming that a lot of issues happening in our country related to crime, related to drug use, is being driven by the border. It's not. Crime is actually going down in this country. And while some of the candidates, specifically those on the right, have tried to emphasize that crime is heightened, that we're in lawless cities across the country, that's not true. President Trump has often referenced Philadelphia as being a lawless city. But actually, currently, crime is going down at this rate from a year ago by over 40%. Homicide rates have gone down by 46%. Recently reported by the Philadelphia Police Department and also by other credible journalists. It's important to understand those issues. It's important to understand misinformation in that role, which now brings us to our next point, the role of misinformation, the role of people being able to understand what's true and what's not true. There's been a lot of talk lately about some of these bigger issues around what to believe, what not to believe. How do we, understand, how do we separate fact from fiction? For starters, it's very important to understand that the role of misinformation and disinformation, right? Because disinformation is a situation where somebody can be giving you information that they don't intend to misinform you, but it is just not true. There's no context there. And then there's misinformation that is very much invested in trying to purposely trick you. And for a lot of the public, it's important to note that right now there is a vested interest in misinformation, disinformation. to make sure that you don't know the right information about the candidates. There is a lot of lies that are being put out on various media platforms, specifically social media. And here are some really important things to understand. For starters, do not believe everything that you see on social media. If you see a meme, a graphic, it's very important for you to maximize your tools. Google. Google. What I've realized when I've seen a lot of misinformation on social media is that when I'll see a flashing headline that is not coming from a credible news site. So what are credible news sources? These are credible news sites that have a reputation, that is being ran by journalists and not random bloggers or opinion people. This is sites that are interested in either being government sourced or they're coming from a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that has been certified credible. Now, credible news sources: ABC News, NBC News, the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. What's important is that with these news outlets that I just named, while there is commentary sections, right, opinion pieces, understand that a lot of the information they're putting out, if it is misinformed, if they do mess up, they will correct. But oftentimes they go by reliable sources. They speak to individuals that can verify the information. Now, certain blog sites, certain social media pages that are not being administered by actual credible journalists, those types of sites you need to keep an eye on, figuring out, okay, where did they get this from? Even certain videos they might show you might be doctored, right? They might be edited, and they may not be credible. Be very mindful not to get your political information from such sites. Make sure that you also take the time that if you see a startling statistic on a random social media page that's not from a major credible news outlet, right? Even locally, make sure that it is important for you to make sure that you Google and see if there are other news outlets reporting similar things. Be careful, because if you do see something that startles you, a statistic that makes you go, well, what is that? Make sure you Google. Make sure that you see if there's other credible news sites saying the same thing, because if not, that can also be a sign for disaster. Now, what's very important to note, that whenever you are receiving this information, I always tell people to check and then verify. So before you share something on your page, before you screenshot something and share it on your Instagram story or your TikTok, or on a Facebook page, or on X, which is formerly Twitter, make sure that you actually see if other credible sources are saying the same thing. It's so important not to spread election lies and misinformation, because I have found myself personally at barbershops, out at the bar, and I'm hearing people, say, well, did you hear this? Did you hear that? About Vice President Harris's race. She identifies as a Black woman and a South Asian woman. She is of mixed ancestry. But yet people will oftentimes spew misinformation that they hear from candidates. Candidates will sometimes, on both sides, give misinformation. Sometimes candidates on both sides will misspeak. And it's important to note that that fact-checking matters. So if you've been watching any presidential debates or forums, please make sure that you look up fact-checking the debate. Google information on fact-checking various issues to get those confirmations, because that is very important. Now, what's also very important is that while the presidential race is taking up a lot of our space, it is taking up a lot of our oxygen, as it should, because it is a very consequential race. In Pennsylvania, which is a battleground state. And what I mean by a battleground state is that it is a state that is going to require the candidates to come here and really try to win over. They're mercurial. They're nuanced states. So states like us includes Michigan. It includes Pennsylvania. Some people argue that in certain regards, places like other areas of the East, the Midwest, those middle ground states, Arizona, Ohio, sometimes they fall rather Republican or red. But then there are some states that they might be able to win, maybe Iowa, right? Not every state is a battleground state. Most people will assume that California will stay blue. New York State will remain blue and Democrat. Florida depends on outcome, but some people argue is fairly red. A state like Alabama, but Georgia is a battleground state. Georgia has went blue, but Georgia has had a history of being red, right, being Republican. And so battleground states like Georgia, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, are states that are going to get a lot of presidential candidate attention, but also the attention of other elected officials running. So Pennsylvania is a battleground state. We also know Philadelphia is a major city. It is the biggest city in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which means that if there is a high voter turnout in Philadelphia, that will lead to changing outcomes, even the surrounding counties. Now, it's important to note that during the 2020 election, that while Philadelphia turnout was a little lower, the uptick in the surrounding Philadelphia counties, those suburbs nearby, the uptick in voter turnout from the Democratic Party is what gave Joe Biden the competitive edge to win Pennsylvania and also become the next president of the United States. Now, Pennsylvania is going to have to do the same thing. Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, those areas are going to also influence the race. Also, Montgomery County, Delaware County, all of that's going to influence it. But it's important to note those other races that will influence the outcome. So in Philadelphia, we have Congressman Brendan Boyle, we have Congressman Dwight Evans, we have other congressmen nearby like Mary Gay Scallon. But with that being said, those congressional races, many people will consider to be ones that will skew Democrat. We will see Democrats win those congressional races. But statewide, the big race to look at is the U.S. race for Senate, where you have incumbent, have a big incumbent that is running, Bob Casey, going against a Republican like Dave McCormick. Dave McCormick is being supported by Trump. He is getting a lot of right-wing support backing him to try to defeat longtime incumbent Bob Casey. Now, Bob Casey is a Democratic incumbent. He is very moderate. His views on abortion rights and has skewed, has changed more so in favor, given what happened with Roe v. Wade. His big policy agenda is on shrinkation, which is addressing corporations that is inflating the cost, that's impacting a lot of everyday Pennsylvanians and Americans who are concerned about the economy, right? That is a big issue that is happening both on the local and national level. And so that race is important. We also recognize several other issues happening. We have the Auditor General race that is taking place. We have the Auditor General race, which is the big one that is happening between Malcolm Kenyatta, who's running against the Republican incumbent. History could be made there. We also have a Treasurer race that is also for grabs. And we also have the Attorney General race, which is involving Eugene D. Pasquale as well. Now, what's very important to note is that while those various candidates are running, it's important for you to know some very important sites to make sure that you're registered to vote and you can check your registration. Now, the most important part of this, how to vote, right? If you're registered to vote, your address has not changed, your voter registration location hasn't changed, and you've previously voted during the primary in person, you're fine. You should be good. And if you're not, you can always check your registration at votephila.gov. That is ran by the Office of City Commissioners. Now, city commissioners, there are 3 of them. There is a Republican city commissioner, and there are 2 Democratic city commissioners led by Chief City Commissioner Omar Sabir in Philadelphia. City commissioners are the people that oversee our election process in Philadelphia. So if you have any questions about voter registration, how to vote, all of those things, that is the office in our city where our taxpayers' dollars work for us to help us in this regard. So if you have any concerns about where to vote, how to vote, that is a great place to go. That is nonpartisan and is there as a service. So if there is any weird behavior happening on Election Day on November 5th, that is where you go. Now, the deadline to make sure that you're registered in this upcoming presidential election, this upcoming election, is October 21st. Monday, October 21st, is the last day that you can register to vote. Now, remember, the website is votephila.gov, and that is where you can go to register to vote if you have not already, if you are a new first-time voter. So if you have friends and family that are 18 years old or will be 18 by October 21st, that is where you should go. Now, if you want to know more information on every candidate, all of the candidates that are running in your respective district and, of course, statewide, there is an incredible website that is nonpartisan, that is by the Committee of 70 called 70.org. That's right, 70.org. That is the website that you should check into to get all the information that you need. Now that you know the resources, you have an important decision to make. On November 5th, make sure that you vote. This is the most consequential election. There's a lot of issues on stake, as we've covered on this episode. And it's very important for you to stay informed, to make sure that you decipher through misinformation, to make sure that you know where to vote and how to vote, and to get all the information you need in this important election. As always, be well and be best.